So in this case, we were very lightly in the future. It was 2029, and it wasn't the most important thing in terms of having every car be like a completely newly designed. The cars that were sort of featured, it was sort of a dystopian future, which helped to a degree that, you know, maybe there hasn't been that much progress made. Things are actually a little broken down from where we are now. The vehicles that were really featured might have some design work done. There was the limousine, which was completely designed. So there were touches like that throughout. There was the self-driving trucks, which come in at one point. It was very important for even that stuff to have a kind of a patina, a kind of an aging that, so it almost felt retro in some ways, this world, because it is kind of broken down. It has sort of edgy, scuffed up details to it, as opposed to this sort of hyper modern, designed future that would be a little further out and a little more utopian. So that sort of helped us in a way, that was the approach. We wouldn't have to manage every single thing to make sure that it looked far enough into the future. In some ways, this movie is it's a science fiction movie. It's a superhero movie, but it's also a Western. It's a noir in some ways as well. So it was a number of genres that were being pulled from that came together here, and the future aspect of it, I guess, wasn't paramount to the sort of character-driven story in a way.
So what kind of...
It's definitely a combination. I mean, a really good example of the production aspect of it, I think, is, for example, the design of the smelting factory where you find our heroes holed up at the beginning of the movie. That was all our production designer, Francois. We did an amazing job designing that place and giving it those kind of rough, rusty edges and creating that world. So that came directly from production, but then also with CGI and effects and everything that came in later, the design of those trucks we were talking about, even places where there was city replacements and all of that kind of stuff. It all had to have an element of grit to it, a kind of that patina. I think that a lot of the people that are doing some of the best work in VFX, that's one of the things that they pay a lot of attention to, is to sort of dirty things up. It's when things get sort of too clean and pristine that you really see the computer-generated edges, and when they're a little more scuffed up, they sit in the world better. They're more related to reality. Great examples are like District 9 or something, where it was this kind of dystopian world or something, and they did a lot with not that huge of a budget for VFX, but the VFX are outstanding, look very real. So I think that kind of approach for any movie that has a bit of CGI is a valuable one to keep in mind. John Barry cut all of our previs, really, and so he was on for months, and while that process was going on, I sort of came on at the beginning of production. Some of that had obviously been developed, and it had been developed with concept art with the production designer. It had been developed in discussions with the VFX supervisor, Chaz Jarrett, that was the kind of approach, I think, of this world that Jim was building, that had this kind of Western flavor to it. In addition to being a slightly future science fiction film. So that you can see that even in the previs that we watch. I mean, that world of the smelting factory, obviously in the previs the textures aren't as developed, so you're not going to see the dust or the rust or those things, but even just the way that the world was constructed was this kind of broken down world. So a lot of that was there in the concept to begin with, and then from there on out, it's just that's the idea. That's the idea that feels right for this story, for these characters, for this world that they inhabit, and everyone keeps their eye on it as the process goes, shot by shot, every visual effects shot, everything that you're designing or creating or putting in the background of a shot. It goes with that. Everyone has that mindset to finding the correct details to sort of flesh it out. So this idea in Logan that you're pulling from different genres, you're pulling from Western, you're pulling from noir in a sense. You are slightly in the future. It's somewhat science fiction. It's a superhero movie, but it's an amalgam of all these genres in a sense that this palette of Logan comes out of. And the thing that I think unifies all of that is some of those are genres from the sort of classic period of cinema, and I think that our director is a real classicist filmmaker in a lot of ways, and it's those ideas about storytelling and the history of films that are still they all lend things to how you can best tell a story with a character-driven story, how you put someone into a character's head and see the world through their point of view, and all of those things. There's a lot of desire on a lot of films to make everything the next big CGI splash or to come up with something that no one has ever seen before. But in a real sense, the real important stuff is still the storytelling, the staging, and the way that filmmakers handle point of view, and all of those things are present in all of those genres. So that thing sort of ties everything together. So I don't think we didn't have trouble navigating that. I mean, I think that there was this palette, this idea that Jim Mangold and Hugh Jackman and came at this project from the very beginning, that this is sort of the world they inhabit, and it's a bit of a Western, and it's got some noirish elements to it, even though it's in the future and even though it's a superhero movie. And what it is really at the end of the day is a character-driven story, and that's the most important thing. Everything else is in the service of that. So there was no conflict in terms of different elements from different genres. It's always fluid. I mean, there's always an element that's fluid. In this case, we had a director who's very good at planning how a scene's going to go together, and sometimes has a couple different plans for it, and may evolve that plan while he's shooting it. But it's not like you're just getting something where they just hose down everything and like figure something out in post. So there are, there's a design to scenes. The staging is phenomenal. So that's a big advantage. Any movie, you're always going to have things that you need to figure out later, or you change the plan, or you want to abbreviate something because it ends up not being the next story point that you want to go to, and you have to find a solution. You have to find a transition that works where you hadn't originally planned to go from this scene to that scene. There are many examples, but there's always things that are fluid and that you have to figure out in the cutting room. Some people have described editing as like there's three main drafts of making a picture. One is writing it, one is shooting it, and the third one is editing. And I think to some extent that's true. I think that that's when you have all the material in front of you and you really figure out what it is that you need and what you might not, and then you have to find ways to get between those things in the most powerful storytelling way that you can. Right. So the film is actually 2 hours and 12 minutes, I think, without titles and everything. So that was kind of the length that we ended up at. I think that the most important thing to all of us on this movie was just to tell this deeply character-driven story, and to just get through stuff, to keep it at a specific runtime wasn't paramount. But no one wants a movie that's bloated or where you're getting away from story. So we just tried to keep in the things that we thought were keeping you with our people and that were important. We're going pretty far with very beloved characters in this movie. So there's a certain amount of time that you have to give things that are stories of life and death like this, and especially about people that are characters that people are attached to. And I think that's where we ended up at that runtime. So we started out obviously with a much longer first cut, and closer to 3 hours, and these things come down as you find out what the essential pieces are to tell the best story you can. And in this case, we ended up at 2 hours and 12 minutes or something like that. For me, it was a fantastic experience. I mean, I felt very fortunate to be with a crew that have all worked together before, and I was the new guy that was dropped into this situation. And it was just an entirely positive experience for me. It's a great team of people that worked extremely well together. a very, very rewarding, collaborative, creative process.